Welcome to Simply Verified Beef, the podcast. I'm Bree Patterson, your co-host from the West Coast of BC. I am the VBP Plus coordinator in BC, and my other co-host is
Amy Higgins, and I am on the alternative coast, in New Brunswick, as the New Brunswick and Nova Scotia VBP Plus coordinator.
The Simply Verified Beef podcast is going to cover all topics related to VBP Plus. So for those unfamiliar with VBP Plus, it's a 4-pillar voluntary program across Canada. We include all producers if you are feedlot or cow-calf. And in the 4 pillars, we discuss animal welfare, on-farm food safety, biosecurity, and environmental stewardship. So these topics throughout our podcasting will fall under one of those 4 pillars or have some sort of overlap in all 4 of them.
And so you'll notice that we're co-hosts. You may see both of us in a podcast episode. You may see one of the 2 of us. Hopefully somebody will be around. Without further ado, we will get into the meat and potatoes of today's podcast. I would like to welcome, we've got 3 guests today, and we have Trevor Welch, who is a beef producer out of New Brunswick. We have Julie-Anne Howe, who is a VBP Plus auditor out of Saskatchewan, and Jaclyn Horenberg, who is a VBP Plus coordinator out of Ontario. So we've sort of gotten a little bit of a cross-Canada cross-section here with us today. And so I'd just like to welcome everyone to the podcast. And I'd like to give Trevor the opportunity first as a VBP Plus producer to just introduce himself and a little bit about your operation.
Sure. Thanks, Amy. So I've got a small purebred red and black Angus herd, and we also run some commercial black baldies here as well. I've been involved. Well, my father bought his first Angus cattle in 1972, and we've had Angus cattle ever since. I was heavily involved with the Maritime Angus Association, and most recently I've been on the board of directors and I'm now the past president of the Canadian Angus Association, which was a great experience for sure. We run about 30 mother cows, and we also have a few bulls and some replacement heifers. We also direct market a lot of our product as beef to local schools, a couple of restaurants, and of course just a lot of local people, which we market our direct beef that way.
Excellent. Well, we're happy to have you, Trevor, and I'll kick it over to Jaclyn next for an introduction from Ontario.
Thank you for the invitation here, Amy, to speak on this podcast. My name is Jaclyn Horenberg, and I work with the Beef Farmers of Ontario. So along with Dan Ferguson, we are the provincial coordinators for the VBP Plus program here in Ontario. I've been in this role for about 4 years now, and Dan has been involved with Verified Beef basically since its inception, so about 17 years now, I would say. So it's really great to see the progress of this program over the years being involved.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jaclyn. And I appreciate you not having to date Dan quite so well with the years he's been involved. So Julie-Anne, you want to give yourself a little introduction from out west in Saskatchewan?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today. Yeah, I am an auditor with Verified Beef Delivery Services Plus. I have been an auditor here in Saskatchewan. I think this is my 5th year now. So I've been through the process. Our operation is actually verified as well. We've been through the process as a cow-calf operation myself. And yeah, I've been auditing since 2017. We've seen the audit process change a fair amount over the past, 18 months most significantly, but over the years we have increased the rigor and definitely increased the interest in the program. So that's my background there in terms of qualifications. Like I said, I am a purebred cow-calf operation. We got purebred Charolais and some Angus cattle as well. They're purebred. And then I have a background in the animal health sector and animal livestock sector as well. And that kind of gave me a good base in order to be trained and considered an auditor. So I live and breathe in the industry, and many of the auditors across the country are in a similar situation where we're either producers or very well versed in the industry. So when we go on farm, we have an idea of what it is like to be boots on the ground.
Great. Well, thank you, and appreciate everyone taking some time out of their busy day to join us here. So the first topic, so we're just going to keep this a little bit loose, but I guess I'd like to start with Jaclyn and then give the others an opportunity to chime in. Maybe you can table the big picture about why VBP Plus, Verified Beef Production Plus. So why should people be looking at this as viable program? And do you have any comments on that, Jaclyn?
Sure. Yeah, I would say consumers have a lot more questions now about where their food comes from. Not only where it comes from, but I would say how those animals are raised, the impact they have on the environment. So quality assurance programs like Verified Beef provide producers that opportunity to tell their story, not only to consumers, but also to retailers. And they can tell their story, I think, through VBP in a very transparent and credible way. With VBP now being a certification body for the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, it's that on-farm verification that provides beef to have that certified sustainable logo that many of you have probably seen in food service establishments. So McDonald's, Harvey's, Chopped Steakhouse. So VBP is really that on-farm verification to get that certification logo. And as Julie-Anne mentioned too, I mean, there is a lot more interest in the program, and a lot of that has come from, I think, growing demand for certified sustainable beef. So it's very exciting to see this industry really coming together to try to meet that demand. Yeah, I'll pass it on at least to somebody else to add some comments in as well. But there is a lot of growing demand for certified sustainable beef. And I think it's really exciting to see the industry coming together to try to meet that demand.
So Trevor, as a cow-calf producer who is direct marketing some beef and all of that sort of stuff, so why did you feel that it was important to go down this path?
Well, really a couple of things. Originally we were selling to a couple of local restaurants and one of a local school and whatnot. So we, along with just the private sector or the families in the area, and I wanted to be able to, I looked at it as a certification, maybe a feather in my cap that will, maybe put me above the neighbor who sells some, that my product is VBP. Admittedly, a lot of the families that we sell to, they certainly are, as Jaclyn said. I mean, a lot of people now are asking about our beef. Is it hormones, antibiotics? There's a lot of the buzzwords that they've heard. And so, I mean, and VBP may or may not address that directly in terms of what I tell them, but it certainly is something that I can say, and that we do this. The other thing that probably maybe most importantly for myself or our operation is it lets people know that we're doing what we say we're doing. That I have a paper record other than just pieces of scrap paper that I vaccinated on this day and I did this on that day and they're all jumbled in my office. I've got a binder that has any medications we've done, our vaccinations, those sorts of things. It's really helped me in my paperwork so that I can just, at a moment's notice, the other day we had a sick calf. Well, the vet was here and I just looked and I said, well, on April 23rd, I gave it this. And April 26th, I gave it its second shot. And I mean, I know the date, the CCs, the withdrawal times. I mean, I have that right at my fingertips. And to me as a producer, that was, it forced me to do a better job for myself. And as I say, on the side of the direct marketing our beef, it just lets people know if they do have questions about what we do and that we have proof of that. And I had hoped that I think that it has given us, whether it's an advantage in the marketplace, but it certainly makes me feel good about it. And it was easy to do. It was something that I should have done before. I was glad to do it.
And Julie-Anne, do you have any comments to that? Because you've got some cattle on your own farm ranch and you're an auditor yourself. So what's the why for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So as a producer, very similar to Trevor on the why. We as a farm got audited shortly after, I think it was in 17, the A&W was doing their thing, but more so when Earls came out and said that they couldn't find sustainable beef. I don't know if some people remember that. It was right before the first Canadian Beef Industry Conference. And I thought, well, no, this is clearly not here, and we have this certification to show what we're doing so we can walk the talk, and demonstrate that, yes, we have beef that we can be very proud of as a country. And I think that that's a pretty fair and standard comment for the bulk of the producers out there, that we are doing these things and they're not recognized without a sustainability or evidence-based practice, which is what we're doing here. So where our operation chose to be certified, and I actually had reached out to the provincial organization because they were short of auditors, and that's when I came on board. And I feel really strongly, we are the last protein industry in Canada to have an assurance system, and we are a voluntary system, which is quite unique. But as Jaclyn has said, we are having producers have more and more questions about what is happening with the animals, what's happening with the food, the environmental stewardship component of life, and particularly cattle production. So those are a lot of the combining factors as to why I became an auditor. And in terms of career, I enjoy working, and it works in quite well as a producer. That it's a flexible job. It's challenging, and it's actually quite eye-opening to see all the different ways that various producers get to meeting the station standard for verified beef, because every operation is unique. We have our baseline requirements and standards, but how the operation gets there is up to the operation, as long as they can show their evidence-based practices. So it's quite interesting and eye-opening to be able to go see the different operations and what's happening there. So I feel it's a very important part of the industry, and I'm happy to be an auditor as part of it.
Great. Well, thank you. So the word audit has this like super negative connotation to it, and it is one of those things, and we have batted around like, is audit the right word? Is audit the wrong word? Audit is what it is, but it just has these scary connotations. So I'll open the floor up to the three of you on what your thoughts are, or is it as scary as it sounds, or what's the rub?
I can start as the one going on farm. I do see that sometimes it really depends on the operation, on where I go to, but there is that feeling that you're under the microscope, right? And what I always like to remind the producers is that we are working together on a certification standard. By the time I come to the audit, individuals like Jaclyn should have you very well prepared. So by the time I come there, you have done the training, they have done a prep call with you in Saskatchewan to see that you're ready. So your records should be there. Before that, even before I come on farm, I also have a contact with the operation. I ask them if they're ready. I do a request for their records beforehand. So if there's a real gap in the records, which is kind of the foundation for the whole program, then that's a pretty big red flag to say, hey, you're missing these things. And it actually doesn't happen, that maybe you're not ready. And really, by and large, by the time you come to the audit, you're actually quite ready for it. And as I mentioned beforehand, there's lots of ways to get to certification. VBP is not there, or as an auditor, I'm not there to tell you how to get to the certification standards. We are auditing to a standard, which is important for the CRSB as well as the CFA, and we have the national codes of practice that we adhere to, but we are not there to prescribe how you get there, right? There's lots of ways, like I said, to do that. We do the inspection, and if things aren't quite to the certification standard, then there's something called a corrective action that's issued, and we work with the producer to get them into compliance. So if you're missing a record, depending on the record, you can either fix it shortly, or if you can fix it in the next 6 months, or even a little bit later, depending on the level of corrective action that we need. So that is the bulk of the ways that things get worked with, right? So it's continual improvement. We have the audit. If there's a corrective action, we work through it. There's always an agreement with the producer. If you feel that you're super unrepresentative, there's also a grievance process that the producer may take. But by and large, by the time we get through it, people are fairly understanding. I usually like to start my audit with a walkthrough, because then it's more conversational, that we do the walkthrough of the operation so we can see things. There's some required elements of your operation that I do need to see in terms of handling facilities, drug storage, things like that. But the walkthrough is kind of a place where the producer can really like tell their story and show how they do their day-to-day business. And then when we move into the Q&A portion, usually the producer is a little bit more comfortable by then. And I try and have an audit fairly conversational, but we are able to get through the required questions and have the required evidence beforehand. So that's kind of how I try and take the edge off a little bit, because yeah, it is a little invasive, right? Because we ask for all your records, we ask to see all these things. So if you're like, oh man, what's going on here and what's going to happen? But at the end of the day, when I come on farm, my producers are by and large 90% prepared, and we do the audit, we do the assessments, and the corrective actions are issued if need be. And that's the way that the process is. And the goal is continual improvement beyond the minimum standards. So that's kind of how we try and make it happen and kind of keep it from feeling super uncomfortable.
So Trevor, I'll throw it over your way as a producer who's gone through this time, or maybe two. And what's your take? Is some of the things that Julie-Anne's saying ring true to what your experience was? Because we're talking about different auditors in different parts of the country and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of it is certainly similar, and I apologize, I can't remember exactly. I think it was 2015 or January 2016. I do remember the day of my audit, it was about 40 below. So our walkthrough was very fast, more at the kitchen table than it was in the barn. But yeah, I mean, I guess I was the first one in New Brunswick, so there wasn't really a lot of coaching or prepping. I took the course. I had the books. I went through, prepared my records. I don't remember what they were, but there was a couple of things that I was missing. Nothing major, but a couple of things that I needed maybe a little better dates on or something like that. But it was really easy. I didn't feel bad at all. I guess I didn't really find it that invasive. We had our records there. We did a quick walkthrough through the barn and looked at where we store our feeds. I think one of the things I was doing wrong is I had all my medicine in the fridge where it should have been a different part or something. But, nothing major that was a real eye opener or a real red flag for me. But it was very smooth. And yeah, I mean, it didn't bother me at all. It was, might have taken couple of hours. The time frame was good. The lady that did ours, yeah, I mean, we had a nice conversation about what we were doing and things that I can do maybe that she's seen other places. So I didn't find it a problem at all, honestly. I thought it was actually probably the easiest part of it, really. Getting myself into the groove of keeping better records than what I was maybe was more of an issue than the actual audit itself. No, I found it very, very smooth.
Great. Thanks, Trevor. So Jaclyn, as a coordinator, you're talking to a lot of folks about VBP Plus, and you're maybe hearing more of the barriers or perceived barriers to this. You got any comments on that?
Yeah, so definitely we're always trying to be the ones convincing people to take that next step after you complete training, go ahead and do the audit. So like Julie-Anne said, a lot of that is really explaining the audit itself is not a pass or fail. That's one thing that we kind of say a lot too, like don't feel like you're going to get in there and you're going to fail the audit like that. It is very outcome based. And like Trevor said too, I mean, a lot of the producers are already doing these things on their farm. So trying to reassure producers that it's an opportunity for you to kind of tell the story of what you're doing on your operation, go through your operation in terms of records and the things that you're already doing. And in many cases, producers have said after the audit they've actually kind of felt good after the audit, like they are doing a lot more things than they really gave themselves credit for before. But audit does sound intimidating. You're right. So that initial thought is a little intimidating for them. But I feel like once they know the knowledge, and with the auditors themselves being very practical and having that industry knowledge, there's a lot more respect there, I think, and that makes it a lot less intimidating. If you can have a conversation on farm and people know what you're talking about, it can actually turn into just a nice visit too, right, of going through your operation. So we try to address those as we're trying to sell the idea of moving forward with an audit for sure.
Any other comments on audits, or just if it's not so stressful, or do you have any anecdotal stories about folks who were super stressed out, or who like what that sort of process was? Maybe that's a question for Julie-Anne, who might have been dealing with more of that process.
Yeah, no, I have definitely have people where they kind of have that deer in the headlights look when you show up, like, she's here, right? And I think we kind of talked about the bulk of it before, is that really showing that producers are usually quite well prepared. And there's always an appetite, especially the producers that we have in the voluntary program, there's always an appetite for improvement, right? So we go through it, and a lot of times there is questions on how to improve. And usually the things that we find, I actually 100% of the time, I've never had someone grieve corrective action that I've had. So it's near 100% that when you go through the improvement or the corrective action, they're like, oh yeah, you're right, I probably should do that, or oh, I hadn't considered that. So really, it's just an improvement, and we try and keep it fairly high level in terms of visits and going through, and it meeting the standards. And like we talked that it's not a pass fail. There's a continuous improvement in the corrective action portion, and that's really a big part of it. And I find that people are most nervous about their records, right? They're like, oh man, all this paperwork. So that's usually the one part that they kind of get a little bit surprised at or a little bit worried about. And I know that the coordinators are doing an excellent job of getting the producers ready for that. And as I mentioned, COVID changed a lot of the ways we do business in the last year. And one of the good things that came out of that is that we figured out as auditors that we can do that records assessment before we get to the farm. So generally I ask the producers to either email or text me a picture of their records, and I can see what's going on there beforehand. And if there's something missing, I can very openly ask and say, hey, I see that you don't have this record. Do you not have a record of it? Did it not happen? Or what's the situation? So a lot of that hurdle is already addressed by the time I hit the farm now. And I think that is quite helpful for the producers to know that that's kind of already addressed, and we go from there. So that's kind of the bulk of it.
And earlier, Julie-Anne, you had talked about you had gone over sort of the process for once you get on farm. So I'll throw it over to Jaclyn. So before we even get to the audit process, so what are some of the steps leading up to that your provincial coordinator could assist with?
Sure. So we try to have producers as prepared as possible of what to expect when somebody's coming on farm to do their audit itself. So with that, we in the training process try to cover off a lot of the material, the must-do requirements. So with VBP, we have a 2-page kind of checklist that basically goes through, these are the main must-do requirements of the program. And that makes it a little easier for, I think, producers to digest and understand, this is what I actually have to have prepared. And having sample records too. I find that quite helpful in the producer manual. There's some sample record forms that producers are welcome to use. And in many cases, they already have their own system. Everyone seems to have their own system of how they're keeping records, and that's fine too. It's just making sure they have the right columns on there, that they are keeping track of everything. So the more we can do ahead of time, I feel like with producers, hopefully the better it goes for the audit themselves. That's mainly, we find, the record keeping and the storage of products. And Trevor, you kind of mentioned that too, like storing them according to label and that kind of thing. Those seem to be the ones that lots of times, or medicated feed too, just things to kind of think about. Anything that could be a potential food safety risk, anything you could do to minimize the risk of something happening, kind of thing. So the more examples I find we can give in training too, of other actual producer examples of things that have happened.
The dog food in the feed,
yes,
the dog food, cat food, all of that sort of old species stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The more examples you can give of actual real life things, the more other producers can relate to that and make sure they're prepared, to not be doing that before their audit. But like has been mentioned, it really isn't quite as intimidating. And most producers really are doing, already doing what the program is asking for. And it could just be a simple, adding a withdrawal date in your record, something like that. So we try to keep them as prepared as we can ahead of time, and very thankful to have auditors who are very knowledgeable and go through things very thoroughly on farm too, to help producers with things we've missed probably before that. So
Trevor, you had gone over a little bit too about what that audit process was like when the auditor got on farm. So you're likely looking at an audit here in the next near-ish future. So what are some things that you're prepping for, or is it just once you've got it and you've got the system, what's the upkeep, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there is, it's some of it, I will say, has kind of become routine in terms of, where we store our feed, and then Jaclyn had alluded to, where we store our cat food, because the cats are in the barn. And so there's things like that that now just happen. And those sorts of things. So, and medications, if, for administering something to a sick calf, or a day that we're doing vaccinations, we kind of have that already. Are my records perfect? I'm sure they're not. There's things that I'm probably missing, and I think actually I was probably supposed to have an audit maybe this past winter, or, but due to COVID, there isn't anything yet. So I would anticipate one probably in the next few months, I think. So will be a chance for me to kind of go through my records again and make sure that I have everything I'm supposed to. But a lot of it does become routine, I think, once you get in the habit of it. And because now, it's, after I'll use the example of a sick calf or a cow that we've had to treat for something. When I come back in the house and put the medication back in the fridge, my book is right there, and I write it down, and so it's become a bit of a routine for sure. I mean, I guess I've been at it maybe about 6 years now. So but again, as I say, I'm sure, an audit will find some holes that I have, and I'll, welcome that to get us back on track.
So before we take off from the podcast here, do you folks have any words, advice, best practices, or watchouts for anyone thinking about going through the audit certification process, or just progressing to the next step of VBP?
Well, certainly the first thing I would say is, as a cow-calf producer or, those sorts of, it's not as ominous as it sounds really. And I hope we've alluded to that today. It's and I would encourage, it's like a lot of things, the more of us that do it and the more of us that get on there, then, it's going to make the whole country look better in terms of that we're meeting these requirements. And admittedly, in the Maritimes here, we're a pretty small cog in the scheme of things. But at the same time, we want to be able to be part of a national program. So I encourage other producers who are not on it. It's stuff you're already doing, and you'll actually find it better, at the end of the day, that you know what you did. And even if nobody ever asks you about it, you still know what you've done and you do have records of it, and the audit. Yeah, I can't stress enough, the audit is, as Julie-Anne and Jaclyn have said, it's very smooth, and it's not, you're not going to the principal's office to get the strap afterwards if you miss something. They'll help you. You'll send in your records again to make sure that you have updated them or filled in the blanks. It's very simple, really. It takes a little bit of your time, and I really encourage producers to join in, because the more of us that are on it, the better our whole program will be across the country. Really, I encourage everyone.
Julie-Anne, any comments? You've been to a few places and seen a few things. What are some things that you'd like to point out as best practices or watch out?
Yeah, I'll just echo what Trevor said. It's not as, I think the anticipation or the unknown, the fear of it is far greater than the actual process, right? I do recommend referring to the website for the sample forms. There's lots of ways that you can do it, but check the sample forms online because they have exactly what you need for your records. That is usually my number one tip to producers after, to say if they're missing. I always refer to the requirement, and for record keeping, the sample forms are the easiest. Trevor's method of using the binder, amazing. It makes it very smooth for an auditor if you have everything in one place, whether that be in paper form or if you're more advanced into Google Sheets kind of situation, but having everything together makes it quite smooth. Similar to what Jaclyn said, in terms of corrective actions, oftentimes it does come back to medication storage and expired medications. So it's always good to go through your treatments, through your storage, and check those things coming through. If you look through your treatments, you can check to see that you don't have anything extra label that you missed by accident, that kind of thing. But it's always good to do just that one check again when the auditor does that contact with you to schedule the audit, to go through the must-dos, the sample forms to make sure that we're online, and then take a huge breath and just say, okay, we're going to do this, right? Because the auditor will come on farm. We're not a pass or fail. So what we find, by and large, we can set a corrective action and move forward to hit the standard. So that's the thing. We prep as best as we can. We want the producer to be very aware that we are flexible on how we meet the standards, but the standards are there. And we're not there to, like Trevor said, give you the slap on the wrist. We're there to meet the standards that we are accountable in terms of the producer, and then upwards through the consumers and the retailers and the packers, that we have this responsibility and this need to hit our certification standards. So we're going to meet those, but we're going to work together to get them, and we're going to work towards continuous improvement. So that's how it is. We're there to see it. We know that the bulk of the producers are doing all these things and doing them very well. So now we're just having the third-party auditor to be able to say, yes, we are walking the walk and talking the talk. And that's all that it is.
And continuous improvement, I think we could do a whole podcast segment on some of these things, and we probably will, in terms of data management or continuous improvement or whatever the case may be. So we don't have enough time today to dig into everything, but we will. And as Julie-Anne and Jaclyn both alluded to, the website's got a plethora of resources. So I'll put the website and some of the links there in the show notes so that everybody can access them as they're listening to the podcast. So Jaclyn, I'll finish off with you. Any words of advice?
Sure. Yeah. So definitely, as mentioned, encouraging producers to get on board, especially right now, there's so much growing demand for certified sustainable beef. I think we're in a great position of retailers recognizing that and really wanting to source that out. So being able to meet that demand, and that involves the whole industry, every sector of the industry to be working together through this. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to help communicate all the good things that producers are doing already on their operations, and communicate that in a way that's a unified national voice that's got a lot of recognition right now. So So it's a great opportunity and great time right now to get involved. And hopefully this has helped kind of ease some of the concerns around and worries maybe around the audit itself, but a great opportunity for producers to get involved and hopefully feel like they're really doing a lot of these great things on their farms already and get some credit for those good practices that they're doing.
And I would like to thank our three guests today for coming in and joining us to talk about the audit process and how it's really simply the audit. It's not anything to overthink about. Just work with your provincial coordinator. If you have a resource like an auditor, like a Julie-Anne is a great example of, those folks see a lot of different farms and a lot of different best practices. That's an opportunity for your firm to take a good look around and see if there are things that you can improve, because I bet you that Julie-Anne sees a lot of good ideas at a lot of different ranches that can be put into practice that you might have just not thought about, because they're getting on to seeing more farms and more operations and ranches than probably most other individuals. So there's a really good resource there. And I would really like to thank everyone for joining us today for the Simply Verified Beef podcast. And we really appreciate your time and effort.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you.
We'd like to thank our sponsors again, since without them, we couldn't have this fabulous show for you guys to tune into.
So thank you to the Canadian Agricultural Partnership through New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. And we will see you next month for the next release, unless we decide to release some bonus material in the meantime. So see you next month.
Catch you guys later.